Hello and welcome to this, the third of a series of Fuller interviews, where we take the opportunity of discussing the life and times of various prominent members of the company. Now today I'm talking with Paul Cuttill, past master and chairman of the GPC. Well, good morning, Paul.
Morning, Michael.
I trust you're well. And getting through the lockdown as we all are, day by day, ticking off the pages.
Yeah, as always, it's just, you get up and you face the day and get on with it and, and do the absolute best you can. It's not great on days, but, we just keep going, and I've got my mask in my pocket, so I'm all set.
If we get too close to each other, we'll put our masks on.
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right.
So, Paul, why don't we start with your early life? I believe that you grew up in the London area, and I'm sure that you've got some happy memories of that.
I do. Yeah, I was born in the upstairs bedroom of a house in Barkingside, which is in the east side of London. Its postcode is Essex, but it's Ilford, and my sister, my mum and dad. It was the first house that for my mum and dad they'd ever owned, and they were the first in their respective families to take a mortgage on to buy a house. Up until then, it'd always been rented, and they both came from Leighton in the East End, so it was a very happy childhood, and usual stuff, school and bit of sport and Sunday school and things like that. But it was when I went to junior school that something really pivotal in my life happened there, which is I came across a very, very enthused music teacher. And he was encouraging people to take up playing brass instruments. And a pal of mine, and I, we just said, well, we'll have a go at that then. What's the worst that can happen? And that started basically 30 years of playing in brass bands, and ultimately it was where I met Claire. So it was a really big thing, and it meant that I played in all sorts of places: Royal Albert Hall, Festival Hall, Queen Elizabeth II Hall, St John Smith Square. Done some brilliant things with it, and it comes all the way back to that music teacher, that sense of enthusiasm. And my parents would say, well, neither of us have got a musical bone in our body. Where's this come from? And the answer is, we've got no idea really. But this teacher just obviously spotted something, and off I went doing this thing, and I'm sure if my dad was still alive, he'd probably say, yeah, it was to the detriment of your schoolwork, boy. But what can you do? So, Tuesday night rehearsals, Sunday mornings, and that sort of stuff. And it provided just a completely different thing to do. And as a boy growing up, it gave a brilliant place for me to operate in and do stuff. And I was okay at it, so that helped, and it presented a fantastic opportunity. So that was life there. And if anybody doesn't know where Barkingside is, look on the Central Line tube map. To the far right hand side of the Central Line, you'll see this little loop of stations, and we actually live closer to Fairlock, which is a very good answer in Pointless on many occasions when they do questions on tube stations. So, but that's where we were, and so that was early life and primary school. Yeah.
And being so tall, you must have distinguished yourself on the sports field as well, in a number 5 shirt or a number 9 shirt or something.
Well, unfortunately, height doesn't necessarily translate into being fleet of foot, because obviously your feet are a long way away from your brain, you see. And so I was, you're absolutely right. I was confined to the second row, on the basis that I could do least damage there. And on the football pitch, I ended up as an extremely tall right back in the number 2 shirt. But yeah, it wasn't my forte really, but you know, we gave it a go, and yeah, so it was quite good fun there, and you know, I did a bit in senior school as well, and but you know, music was the big thing really for me. It just took up, you know, an awful lot of time, and as I said, my dad would say, yeah, well, you should have been doing some schoolwork, boy, and that would help. But you know, it's one of those.
What
things.
did you play, Paul? What did you play?
I started on the euphonium.
Did you?
Yeah, a very, very traditional brass band instrument. And then in later life, the band I was in, they had too many euphonium players and they needed some tuba players, the big ones. So I went and played a bit of tuba towards the end, and yeah, so it was great fun, and we had some great times, and you know, in those days it was you could do some fairly crazy things in those days. We managed to do 4 pubs one night in the hour after band rehearsal, but you know, that's a completely different story.
What was that, drinking or playing or both?
There was no playing by then, Michael, I tell you. It was as many pints of Tuborg Gold Lager that we could cover off in the hour. So and then
well, as you would say,
the following day. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Happy days.
yeah. There we go.
So after school, I know a little bit about your background, but did you go directly into the LEB? How did that all work?
Well, it was interesting because I was getting towards the end of the upper 6th. I was doing these A-levels, music, geography and economics, which is a fairly eclectic mix, I have to say.
Yes.
And it was, my dad always used to leave my mum to deal with the, you know, the sort of the you know, the issues about how you're getting on and what you're doing. But he was always there, and you knew that there was this sort of brooding presence in the background, and you know, and as tough as my mum was, and she was at, you know, 5'3", she was terrifying, frankly. Loving but terrifying. But my dad was always there, and so I had this idea that what I really wanted to do was go to university to study music. And so obviously my mother had told him this, and it was a very rare occasion that he sort of called me to one side. And because if he did that, then you're really in trouble. Then you really are in trouble. And he said, "You can do that, but you're not living here if you're doing that. You know, I think you need to go out to work, son. That's what you need to do. You don't need to do your studies. Frankly, you've poodled along through 7 years of grammar school. You need to get out there. You need to get into a career. You need to start earning, and then you'll understand what life's really about." And he was absolutely right. He was absolutely right. And my mother came home. I was revising for my A-levels, and she came home and said, "There's this advert in the LEB showroom in Barkingside High Street. They're looking for clerks. And here's the telephone number, and you're going to ring it now, and I'm going to stand over you while you're doing it." "Oh, okay, Mum, that's what we'll do then." So, you know, dialed the number, got through to the lady on the end of the phone, and she asked how old I was and what I was studying. So I told her I was 18, I was studying A-levels, and she said, "Well, you're too old and too well qualified for us." So I thought, oh, that's a bit of a result then. So, you know, but she said, "But I know there's a man at head office looking for somebody." So she gave me this guy's number. His name was Charlie Shepherd. So I put the phone down, and my mum said, "So what then?" I said, "Well, they tell me I'm too old and too well qualified. So, you know, what am I supposed to do?" She said, "So what's that number?" So I said, "That's another number I can ring." So you get on and ring it then. So I rang. This fella answered the phone, and he said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" So I had to go to the office, which was in New Broad Street, which is very close to Liverpool Street Station. It's a block turning, and it was down the bottom on the right. And I had a 2-hour interview for a clerk with this guy, Charlie Shepherd. Yeah. And at the end of it, he said to me, "So how much do you think you should earn?" I had absolutely no idea. So I just said, "Well, you know, perhaps 2,000 a year." This was 1977. Yeah. 2,000 a year. he said, I'm not too sure we could stretch to that, but we might be able to do, 1,850. So I went, oh, okay, well, and that was it, So I got back on the central line and came home and walked back and told my mum and went off to do some more revision because I was still doing exams and whatever. What I didn't know was my uncle worked in the post room in the same office.
Ah.
So the story goes, he gets called up to Charlie Shepherd, and Charlie Shepherd says, so this nephew of yours then, So obviously my uncle must have said something positive. And again, the story goes that my uncle rang my dad. It was my dad's brother. And so my mum and dad knew on the night I'd been for the interview that I was going to get the job, but they didn't tell me. And
really?
Yeah, the story goes that they said, well, we can't distract him from his A-levels because all he'll start thinking about now is this. So they didn't tell me. So the first I knew was when the letter came through the post. And I said, oh, look at this. And they said, yeah, we know. We've known for 10 days. And so I finished my last music exam of my A-levels, because music always came very early in the exam program and very late. They were always tacked on the bookends. So this pal of mine and I were the last two sixth formers left in school for this last exam. That was the Tuesday. I started work on the following Monday. Yes. So 4th of July, 1977. I started as a clerk in the company secretary's office in New Broad Street. So, yeah, literally, finished exams, 3 days off, and then into work. And so I was, incredibly lucky. But again, it was because my parents had just stood over me and go, this is what you're going to do, because
yes.
we know you better than you do at the moment. And, you just got to get out there and just open your eyes and broaden your horizons. And they're absolutely right, because within 3 months, I discovered the concept of ambition, which I'd never seen before or experienced or thought about it. I was just doing the thing.
Yeah.
And there were great people there. I mean, but it's, it's a bit like Butlins holiday camp. It really was. I mean, it was, we had London Electricity Board was 257 square miles of the centre of London. It's not even the area inside what we now know as the M25. It's much, much smaller than that. We had 12,500 employees. I mean, it was incredible, really. And I just looked around and thought, well, if I can't get on in this environment, I really need my backside tanned, and this it's suddenly, and you get money in your pocket, aren't you, Michael? And
yes.
And you start to feel a bit of independence, and so I just sort of put my head down, and they gave me some day release to do an ordinary national certificate in business studies. ONC, that's right. So they did that, but I started thinking about, well, what can I do? And I had some amazing chances, Michael. I really did, because I joined in 77, and in as it happened, by 1997, I was a director and on the board. So yeah. That, it was every time I started thinking, well, what's going on here? Something else came along. They said, can you go and do this, or can you go and do that? And there was some really, really pivotal moments. When I was 19, they sent me off to look after a building. They'd call it facilities management now, Michael, but in those days it was called bogs and drains. And that wasn't the official job title, but that's what it was. And I was responsible for 40 people. I had my own office. It was a building of 40,000 square feet, this building. It was in Bethnal Green. And so, cleaners, security, telephone staff, canteens. And I was there for 3 years. It was probably one of the longest stints I did in jobs. And it was, from 19 and through when Claire and I got married, and up to about 1981. So I did this thing, and there's some things you remember, these very, very early things. That the guy in charge of the building, the sort of the house foreman, he was a desert rat. That's what he was. And,
yes.
But he would quote Shakespeare at me. the fella lived in Bethnal Green. He walked to work, and but you know, we'd end up having a discussion about Shakespeare, you know, and I'm thinking, what on earth is this going on? But you know, in those days, Michael, we had our own central stationery store. So people used to buy all the paper and pens and whatever, and it came into this massive store. And then there was this fella that used to drive around London all week long, delivering stationery to the various offices. And you know, today you see those UPS vans where the driver doesn't get out the driver's side. He nips across and jumps out the slidey door on the left. He had one of those vans. So this is, you know, the late 70s. But he had to get past his pet bulldog that was sitting on the passenger seat. And this pet bulldog went everywhere with him. I don't know if he thought he was going to get turned over for the paper or pens. I don't know, but yeah, Graham Rogers was his name, and so it's just amazing characters. And because this was the late 70s, you know, it is only, you know, 30 plus years after the end of the war, and
yes,
you know, and people that had served in the war in their 20s, you know, were all still working there. So, you know, and people who hadn't served, you know, Flossie in the canteen, and you know, Irene in the canteen. You know, if you got on Irene's good side, you got double spuds at lunchtime. So
exactly.
You know, so it was just stuff like that. But it was, you know, it was very, very sort of character forming, really, because you're dealing with 40 people, and they're looking at you as a 19-year-old, you know, barely in long trousers, really, and plays the euphonium. I mean, who the hell's this? Yes. And so you started to learn that you had to try and structure conversations. You couldn't just pile in if you're talking to a security guard and say, well, you know, why the hell are you late this morning? You got to, you know, try and get to the crux of it, and you know, in a way. So it was, you know, we used to inspect the building every week, Michael, on Friday afternoon. Me and the Desert Rat would be walking around going, well, that's fallen down, because it was in a shocking state.
Yes.
And it's still there. The building's still standing. I don't know, but
really?
Yeah. I think the council use it now. And again, there used to be a showroom in the bottom of it. And it was just, you know, all sorts of things came up. You know, Security Express were on strike one week. So how the hell are we going to get all the wages to the people who were still paid cash? And so I was told that I had to get in this unmarked car with a pool driver called Terry Fuller. He looked like a boxer as well. And we had to drive to the accounting centre in Borough High Street, just over London Bridge. And we had to pick up 3 bags of wages. He then drove me back through to Bethnal Green, and I'm parked outside the showroom, and I had to walk across the pavement with 3 bags of wage packets into the showroom to get it into their safe. And I don't remember signing a risk assessment off for that.
I'm sure you didn't.
So it's just these crazy things that well, crazy in today's sort of view, it would never happen like that. But those are sort of things you did, and you came home and you sort of you know, you just thought about this and what it meant to try and draw people with you and get you to do things and stuff like that. So that was, you know, that was really, really important. And then I got a chance in 87. It's interesting. Lots of things happened in the years ending 7 for me. And you might recall from the old civil service grades, there was a grade called executive officer.
Yes.
And if you got into that, then that was a, you know, really big step. And I did that in 87 and got into industrial relations. So one of the jobs there was I was the secretary of the works committee and the staff committee and the technical staff committee and all that. And so, you know, in the 80s, it was still heavily unionized. In fact, it was a closed shop, because when I joined, when I reached, no, I was 18. So after 4 weeks, I had to join a trade union, otherwise I had to leave. So it's still very heavily unionized, and the works committees were interesting. They were interesting, and they go on for hours, and you'd be talking about, you know, all sorts of stuff. Subsequently, we were trying to introduce an alcohol policy, not how much you could drink, but the fact that you're not supposed to. So we presented this at some point, you know, and we're talking particularly with the industrial staff, because, you know, they'd go down the pub and then go back on the job. I mean, it's,
yes, quite.
You know, it's that was the way it was. And so we're trying to introduce the alcohol policy. And so our chief medical officer was explaining that even if you've had, you know, some drinks the night before, you know, it's still in your body the following morning, because these guys were all driving vans and stuff like that. And so she said, so if you've had a skinful the night before, you know, you really shouldn't be driving the van the following day. And this works committee representative, and he was a bit of a fella, he was. His name was Freddie Woon. And and he said, well, Dr. Samuel, then he said, what's your definition of a skinful? And of course, we're all sat there going, don't answer this. Don't get drawn into how many pints makes a skinful. But the medical officer, you know, terrific lady, she said, well, you know, I guess, you know, 6 or 7 pints is probably a skinful. So Freddie Woon pipes up and says, 6 or 7 pints? That's only a gargle. So, of course, that was the end of that meeting. We decided to adjourn it at that point and come back to the issue. So, but it was just, the place was just full of these characters. Most of them fairly benign. Some of them were pretty rough. And there was some bad things happened. You know, guys being taken around the back of buildings and
yes,
being reminded how they're supposed to vote and all that sort of thing. And that was still going on, early 90s, that was still going on, because I saw it one day and we had to deal with it. And so, yeah, it's you know, I'm giving the impression that it was just a right old jolly up. It wasn't, because through the 80s, and leading into privatisation, clearly by December 1990, we were privatised. And so it had to change a lot. And for us in London, we were bottom of every performance table. We just were, compared to the rest of the country.
Really?
Yeah,
Yes.
we were. It's a very difficult environment. And I'm not putting out excuses, but you think of some of the electricity boards around the country, 2/3 overhead lines, 1/3, maybe 25% underground. We were 99.9% underground.
Yeah.
The only bit of overhead line we had was where we then built the Olympic Stadium, so we had to bury it. So anyway, so, you know, every repair was a dig out. Whereas with overhead lines, obviously you can see what's going on and it's easy. So it's a very, very challenging environment, and there were some pockets of out and out resistance that had to be addressed, and I'm trying to use a sort of a military term unwisely, but there was a bit of mopping up we had to do.
Yes.
And that got fairly clunky on occasions, and to be fair to the full-time trade union officials, they knew it, but of course they're full-time trade union officials, so it's difficult for them to be too forceful. But there were some very far-sighted trade union officials, full-time paid trade union officials, who understood what was coming and tried and worked very, very hard with us to find arrangements that could land sort of okay.
Yes.
And one of the things I learned then was, when you start out in a negotiation, shoot for the moon, go for the lot if you can, but know that you just might have to give some, and then always be prepared to come back to it in a subsequent conversation. And that's how we did it. And we took some big steps, but we also did some small steps as well. And the small steps often paid off just as much as the big steps. But every now and then we had to take a stand. And so one of my jobs was representing the company in employment tribunals.
Really? So, now, was this before 97 or after?
This was before. So early 90s. in the immediate years of privatisation, we had to, we were being tasked to really push on with stuff.
Yes.
And sometimes that meant that you were taking action that some staff didn't find particularly comfortable. And so we had plenty of claims against us for unfair dismissal and stuff like that. But I was always in the place that if we think it's the right decision, then we should take it. If we lose in a tribunal, we lose in a tribunal. That can be 18 months down the line, and with the power of hindsight, But if you really, really sit there and you believe, I'm sorry, this is what we've got to do because the circumstances warrant it, then you've got to do it and back yourself. And we lost one or two, Michael, but the majority were found to be fair. And at the end of the day, fair and reasonable is what we always aimed for. And I'd like to think that anybody that worked for us at that time would say that that's what we were. There were bumps in the road, Michael, there were, but that was how we always went about it. And that, when I was personnel director in '97, that was really what I wanted. And also I always used to tell the people in the teams, the management teams, never lose on process. If you're going to lose on an interpretation.
Yes.
Never lose a case on process. And that's
be well prepared.
Exactly, Michael. Exactly, and that it may well be that some of my colleagues on the GPC have witnessed that, but that's where we were. It was always, as I say, never lose on process. That was a real kick in the teeth. That was if you mucked up a bit of paper and it gave just that little bit of wiggle room. And,
of course.
So we very rarely did. But of course, in these days, Michael, we'd never be able to do that ourselves. It would all be lawyers and all that sort of thing. But in those days, I was the prosecutor, as it were. I made the case in front of employment tribunals. But now it would obviously be all legally based and whatever. But so that was an interesting experience doing that. So, and then privatisation came along, and we had 6 years of that, and then we got bought by a company based in New Orleans, Entergy, which is a big operator of American nuclear plants. They're still there.
Yes.
So they owned us for a couple of years, and it was those guys that made me personnel director. And,
really?
Yeah.
Based in London?
Based in London, yeah. Well, then we were still London Electricity, so the territories were the same. But the American guys, they didn't last very long. They were around for a couple of years, but they had a big change back in the States as to whether they wanted to be international or not, and they decided they didn't want to be, and so they sold, and we got bought by EDF, so that was then the start of that process, which is still there today. The company's still called EDF Energy, and so they bought us in the back end of '98. That was announced, and then it completed in early '99, and we then went on the acquisition trail, and so we were buying, retail businesses, power stations, other networks, and so where we got to by 2002 was that we owned these three networks.
Yes.
The old Eastern Network, the London Network, and the Seaboard Network, what is now UK Power Networks.
Yes.
And we owned some power stations, and the SWEB supply business down in the southwest, and obviously the Seaboard Power business as well, because we bought that whole company. We only bought the network in Eastern. And then in 2002, what turned out to be my last job, which was the chief operating officer looking after that networks business, and we did that for 6 years. So,
tremendous job, Paul. A tremendous job to have, I would have thought. Fascinating.
It absolutely was, Michael. It had its very dark days, and that's not a pun on lights going out, by the way. It had its dark days, Michael. There's no getting away from it. It's a very safety intensive business, and some days we just didn't do very well on that, and that was very, very difficult and very painful, and then you had some brilliant days where you're faced with some really, really big challenges. And what I always felt with that group of people, many of which are still there, they had an approach which was one of, we understand that we're serving our local population with electricity. And, you know, we had over 40% of UK GDP relying on the networks that we had. 20 million of the population lived and worked on this network.
Yes.
And so it, you know, absolutely 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the thing is that, yes, you know, you felt it, but what helped you was that you had this workforce of 5,500 people and another 2,000 to 3,000 contractors every day, you know, come rain, shine, or whatever, putting their shoulder to the wheel, because
Yes.
for lots of them, they lived in the area they were serving. And so, you know, people would stop him in the petrol station on a Sunday, or stop him in Sainsbury's going, so what happened this week in the high street, you know? And I had no understanding of that until I got into this. And at the end of my first month in 2002, we had a very, very bad piece of weather came through. The last weekend in October 2002. And at its height, we had 500,000 customers off.
Good gracious.
Yeah. And we, you know, the performance for the vast majority of people in terms of restoration was terrific. But there were a big chunk of people to whom the service we gave was simply not good enough. And it was a very difficult week. So it happened on the Sunday. I was on the 7:10 slot on Tuesday on Radio 4's Today programme.
Yes.
Getting caned by Martha Carney.
Yeah.
And because by the Tuesday, we still had 32,000 people off supply.
Yeah.
So they'd been off for 2 days. And we didn't get the final ones back until the Saturday, Michael.
Really?
So pretty much a week.
Yeah.
And that's simply not good enough. And we got through it. We got through it, and it was very difficult. It was a very long week. But for me, it felt long week, but it was nothing compared to the crews going out 14-hour shifts, coming back,
Yes.
sleeping, going out again. And they worked, you know, 9 days solid. And so the effort was unbelievable to get it back.
Yes.
So I felt my job was then to make sure we never went there again.
I was going to say you would learn a tremendous amount from that experience, hopefully.
Yeah. And so what we did is we held our hands up. And I think this is a really, really important thing to do. You know, if you muck up, you've got to say so quickly. If you believe that, and there was no doubt in my mind that we could have and should have done better. So what we did, Michael, is we took 2 or 3 people offline, and we got them to look at everything. We gave them carte blanche to go anywhere, talk to anybody, and we told the staff, you know, say what you want, you know, within reason, but say what you want. And we gathered all this information. It was a mountain of information, and we distilled it all down, and we got to 57 actions, and we called it Heinz 57. And we went to the board of London Electricity at that time, we hadn't rebranded to EDF Energy then. And we said, this is what we think we've got to do. Here's the 57 steps. And we embarked upon it. And the weather incidents never went away because you can't stop the wind blowing.
Quite.
And but we tracked our performance every time we had a poor incident. And every time we were better than the one before.
Terrific.
And so, you know, there were still lessons each one. And to this day, they still learn lessons each time it happens.
Yes.
But every time we were better than the one before. And so when I got called in front of the Trade and Industry Select Committee in the House of Commons in September 2003, so nearly 11 months after, we went along, and the first thing we did was admit that we got it wrong, because, and it's interesting, Michael, because there's all the press guys from the Eastern Daily Press and stuff like that, and because this was all in the Eastern area, it was where it was.
Yes.
And you could see them all put their pencils down, because I'd admitted and apologised. It's the first thing we said. We said, it's really important to say in front of all of you today. One of the members was Lindsay Hoyle, who's now the Speaker of the House of Commons. He was in the Select Committee. And we said, you know, some of our customers did not get the service to which they were reasonably entitled. And for that, you know, I sincerely apologise and take responsibility for it. And we then told them what we'd done and what we continued to do. And that was, you know, we were in front of them for 2.5 hours.
Really? That's a long time.
There's just myself and the ops guy. Sadly, he's died now, but and we just sat there and we told this narrative of what hadn't worked and what we'd done about it, and also the steps we'd taken to try and integrate partner organisations in. It was interesting. There was a Conservative MP, Gillian Shepherd. I think she was Secretary of State for Education once. She was a MP at the top of Norfolk.
Yes.
And I must have done about 30 individual MP meetings as well, going to the House and meeting them. And she said to me, what on earth were you doing, wasting your time trying to get sandwiches and water out to people? Have you not heard of the WRVS, Mr. Cuttill? You know, what do you think you're better at them than distributing food parcels? Well, no, not really. No. She said, well, look, here's, you know, and so we went along to them, to the WRVS, and we struck this arrangement with them. And so when you know weather's coming now, which we didn't at the time, we didn't have this system, but you go through an alert system and you gradually go green, amber, amber, red, you know, super purple, and oh my goodness, the world's coming to an end. And one of the trigger points is, when do we tell the WRVS to get ready? And that was one of the lessons. And so whenever these batches of bad weathers come in, we'd trigger the call into WRVS and they'd mobilise their people and they'd be ready to go. And we gave them an annual sort of donation, whether we called on them or not. And it was tuppence halfpenny. And so these things about partner organisations, who can you partner with to help you? Because when you're in the thick of it, you just think you've got to do it all yourself. And that's completely daft. And so some really, really big lessons in that job, Michael. And by 2008, you know, I don't mind saying I was completely exhausted.
Yes.
And decided that I'd done what in the end was 32 years. And so came out and then went to a more plural lifestyle. And
but you got recognised during that period as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. And it was an interesting one, Michael, because you know, clearly you have absolutely no idea that anything like this is going on. And I had no idea that each one of these pieces of recognition, they're 18 months in the gestation. They go through 7 stages of review. I had
Yes.
no idea. And as it turns out, it was sort of about the job. But in 1998, before I was doing the networks job, so this is the second year of the Blair government. They came in 97.
They did.
And you remember New Deal, which was funded by a tax on all the utilities for excess profits.
Yes.
Well, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor thought this was such a jolly good wheeze, they'd do it again. And so they did it again. But this time it was called New Deal for Communities. And so this was a specific amount of money. And they had 10 pathfinders where they were going to inject money to try and assist communities. And they would typically pick large social housing estates.
Yeah.
And they picked 4 in London. And in 98, part of my job then was the whole communications and public relations and what you'd know today as responsible business. And so we decided, and we got the local authorities responsible for these 4 estates. We called them all in and said, how at London Electricity can we help? And 3 of them said, we don't need your help. We're very happy to come along and, drink your tea and eat your sandwiches, but we don't need you. But this fellow from the London Borough of Southwark said, I need your help. I have no idea what's going to go on here. And they were given £250 million, or would have access to £250 million for an estate in Southwark called the Aylesbury Estate. And the Aylesbury Estate is one down from the large estate right by the Elephant Castle tube station. It's the next one down.
Yep.
And it was one of these estates where historically they'd leveled out all the 2 up, 2 downs, and they'd built these sort of 11, 12, 13-story blocks of flats, and the pavement was on the first floor. Do you remember those, Michael? Where
yes, I do.
You could walk for a mile on the first floor through all of these estates, and all the garages were underneath. And needless to say, the planners who envisaged these garages being, something, other than what they turned out to be, which was drug dens, frankly.
Yes, yes.
And so this estate, the Aylesbury Estate, 12,000 people lived there, 155 different nationalities, 8 variations of Nigerian was spoken on this estate.
Good gracious.
And it had, multiplicity of challenges. And the fact that it was in Harriet Harman's constituency, of course, is neither here nor there, but, it's just the way it is. She was very, very good, I have to say, Harriet Harman. She was very, what I saw of her in that local setting, she was an excellent constituency MP for them. But they created a board to try and manage this. And so they said, well, we need a business representative on this. And so when I said this back at London Electricity, everyone looked at me and said, well, you better go and do that. And you went, oh, okay. So every 6 weeks, I'd get in the car and I'd drive down to the Aylesbury Estate at 6 o'clock at night. And every 6 weeks, there'd be this 4-hour board meeting and trying to understand how they could reach agreement as to what to spend this money on.
Yes.
Should it be a rebuild? Should it be something else? And it was complicated. It really was complicated. Because to begin with, you go down there thinking, well, just, why are we, creating so much heat on this topic? Let's just get to it. But it's really, really difficult. It's really difficult. And I learned so much understanding how local people trying to represent the communities they're living in, when they're when they've got the opportunity to spend a huge amount of money,
yes,
it still isn't a panacea. It needs real local engagement and then commitment. But reaching that engagement and commitment agreement was very, very difficult because there's such a wide range of ideas, demands, historical grievances, and between some were tenants, some were freeholders, and some were leaseholders.
Yes.
Who appeared, well, you'll know this better than me, Michael, who looked like they'd got, you know, lifelong leases, which they could then bequeath, you know.
Yeah.
So it's really, really complicated. And so I did this for 10 years, every 6 weeks, for 4 hours, for
Yes.
10 years. I did it until I left. So I started in 98 and I finished it in 2008.
Good
and
gracious.
So in 2006, along, you know, I got home one night and there was this envelope that says from 10 Downing Street, and opened it up, and there it was. And the reason that it was predominantly for that was because I then discovered that the process had been started by what was then called the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister, which was John Prescott. And he was responsible for the New Deal for Communities Fund. And that's where it had emanated from. Yes, it had meandered around all sorts of people, but that, because I didn't know until I got invited to the reception for all the OBPM's nominees for the year. And so I went, oh, okay, I'll go along, and you know, and that's how I knew. So yeah, and that was it's
a very thorough vetting procedure. A chum of mine was similarly honoured a couple of years ago, and that followed, as I say, quite an intensive background activity to make sure that the people concerned are appropriate for the honour.
Well, it's interesting, Michael, because when we went in February 2006, my dear old dad was still alive. My mum had gone, but my dad was there. He was 89.
Really?
And so all the requirements came through. So, you know, you've got to go along with a passport or a driving license. All he had was a bus pass. That's all he had left. You know, he wasn't driving anymore. He wasn't going overseas. He had his bus pass. And he was... And when he was called up, he ended up as a company sergeant major in the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. So all he had was his bus pass. So we get to the gates of the palace on the day, and the policeman comes along and wants to see all the ID. So Claire was with me and our daughter, obviously. And so he came along, and I said, "Look, all my dad's got is his bus pass." And he said, "Right, he's 89, is he?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Did he serve then?" I said, "Yeah." What he said, you know, I was company sergeant major in the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. He said, "I think you're a fairly low-level security risk, Mr. Cuttill. I think we'll let you in." So, but that's all he had was his bus pass. So, but it was, it was a day. It was terrific, and
day to remember.
Yeah,
a day to remember.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you get involved with the Fulers while all of this was going on in the noughties?
Yeah, well, you can blame the Reverend Peter Mullen for that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. So the interesting thing is that London Electricity had an annual carol service. Lo and behold, the carol service was held at St. Michael's in Court Hill. And so I was there one day playing in a brass band, and Peter came up and said, "You really need to be a Fuller." And I went, I'm really? And who are you? Spent a bit of a chat. He then took me to lunch, as Peter would. I think it was the Arts Club. I can't remember. Peter will tell me off for not being able to remember his generosity. But he took me to lunch, had a bit of a chat, and the next thing I knew was I had Andrew Bainbridge coming through the door, and I knew I was in trouble because he had the application form open in front of him, and so we had a bit of a chat, and so I signed up, and that's how it started, and Peter Mullen. So if any Fuller says, Who was it that let this reprobate in? Then you can go to the good Reverend in Eastbourne and you can remonstrate with him. But so that's how it was. So it was interesting. So it was interesting.
A slightly different company then to now, Paul.
Yeah, it was. It was. It's and again, it was another one of those sort of eye openers for me, because even though I'd worked in the city all my life, and stood at the Lord Mayor's parade how many times, I don't know, with my mum and dad and stuff like that. But, it just had not sort of got through my consciousness as to what all this was about, and the philanthropy of it, the positioning of the city in terms of export and all that sort of thing. It just hadn't cut through at all. So, if someone had talked to me about the order of precedence, what's all that about, and so it was, I had to sort of get fairly rapidly up to speed on this. And of course, these were the days of, of dear old Brian Harrison and Richard Budge and Mac McComb and people like that. And, and Doug was the guy that put me into the livery, and people like Michael Husband and John Bainbridge, getting into the swing of that. But it's interesting because I don't know why I'd never thought about or had any consciousness of this. My dad worked all his life in Bow Lane, which is just off the Cheapside. I mean, how did that happen? He worked in a warehouse there, and so the city was very instilled in him. He went in and out every day, and so yeah, it was a different company, but and obviously lots more coal and stuff like that. But
yes,
but it was already then. There were people, very enlightened people, that understood that if this was going to continue, obviously people like Edward were there, dear old Michael Briar-Ash, these sorts of people were there, and and many others. Forgive me, I'm not mentioning, not through anything other than we're all day doing it, but many people that were guiding the company along the start of this path. These people who said, we've recreated this out of the ashes of 1665, and we're going to, this needs longevity. We're not going to do this whole application process and getting back in the order at 95 to then, for it all to then, sort of fade away. So it was clear then that there were people that wanted to see, roots planted and grow, and and even then, Michael, it was about how do we get more people to be fuelers.
Yes.
And it's still the same today. It's how do we get the fuelers company offering to be so great that people want to come, and so great that they will then want to stay. And I think that remains as much today as it was back then. And that's always, if someone asks me, what's the goal? Get bigger. Let's worry about the challenges of scale and size, and we'll worry about that, but get bigger. There's no point in there's no point in saying well, we'll sit with what we got. If you've got what do they say when you win the Premier League? The next thing you do is go invest in the next generation of players, and that's where we are too, I think, and we've been really successful at it. I think it was 150 in the company when I joined, and we're 80, 90 more than that now.
Yes, absolutely.
And if not more than that. So it's that's, and you could always see it then. Yeah, it's a lot different now. We do different things, and this year clearly has presented a whole plethora of new challenges, a bit like what we're doing now, really, Michael. And to get the offering as online based as we can, and the thing is, Michael, we all look forward to the return to face-to-face engagement, because that's a really important part. But what we've done in 2020, the cork's out the bottle now, Michael. It's not going back in now.
No.
No. This is we're now going to blend what we've been doing this year to keep alive and going, we're going to blend it now with what we were doing before. And that isn't in any way a criticism as that we should have done this sooner. It's not at all. I was a master in 2012, 2013 and never thought.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that before we go.
Yeah. but now it's a blend. We now know that this works, and we can blend it in, and so that we make the offering even more compelling. And that, I think, is what's important, because for some people, the face-to-face stuff and wearing all the Hogwarts outfits and whatever, which is what was described to me once, it doesn't work for some people. That's not what they want. They want knowledge, they want experience sharing, they want conversation, education. That's what they want. And
yes.
So we've got to make sure. Well, as I say, cork's out the bottle now, Michael, and it's not going back in.
I know, it's exciting times.
It is.
Let's talk about 2012, Paul. I was just about with the company at that time, and I thought you had a lovely year. What do you feel were the highlights of your year? What do you look back on with satisfaction?
So Claire and I put a lot of effort into the installation of haberdashers. 184 of us in the room. I remember it being pretty warm with 184 people in the room. I was lucky to bag Sir John Armitt as the guest.
Yes.
And John had just chaired the delivery authority to deliver the games. The games had finished,
just a couple of months before. Yes.
Exactly. So he came along and talked about that, and that was very, very special, I have to say. That was a very special evening for Claire and I and our family. We're not a huge family on either side, and so we were all there, and so that was very special. We had terrific support through the year, and that was we did a Masters weekend down here in Sussex.
I was there. With Jill.
Absolutely. And funny enough, on the Sunday we came to Arundel Castle, which I can see out the window from the office here. And so that was really good. And we had I managed to bag some really good speakers. Dame Julia Cleverton came and spoke about corporate responsibility, social responsibility, and responsible business from her role in business and community. I knew a previous High Commissioner from Australia, so he came along at election court and talked about what he did down there, as well as driving from Britain to Bulgaria before the Iron Curtain came down, when he was appointed to the embassy in Sofia. And then the Chief Executive of the Royal Opera House, and Alex is still there. He did the Midsummer Court for me, and so we try to tell a story through the year.
Yes.
Michael. Hopefully, people welcome that, and again get more fuelers in, and that was the task. And certainly I was preceded by Stuart, you remember, and succeeded by Dennis, and the three of us, talked a lot about what we were going to try and see through this 3-year period, because it's quite difficult to get stuff done in a single year. And you don't really want to say the grass is green one year and then the following year it's blue.
Continuity is very important.
It is. And we started using skinners in that 3-year period. And so we were very keen to get a base in the city. We felt that was the next point of evolution. And what was interesting, Michael, we went to Midsummer Court in Stuart's year. So that would have been June 2012, with the idea of Skinner's, taking the office at Skinner's. And we were slightly concerned as to whether it would land well. And we'd done our preparatory work with the main court, but we sort of thought as to whether the honorary court would see this as an unnecessary step and whatever. And we need not have worried. We need not have worried because Edward Wilkinson and Brian Harrison, just as two that I remember from the meeting, passionately saying, this is what we always wanted, envisaged and hoped for.
Yes.
And Stuart, Dennis and I sort of rocked back in our chairs just a bit, because it's not that we'd misread it, but, you know, we just were concerned that it perhaps might not be what everybody wanted, and we didn't want to get too assertive about it. But we need not have worried, because we had landed upon what had always been thought of as a natural evolution, and will be forever grateful to that cohort of past masters.
Masters, yes.
Who certainly from my experience, both as a master and going into and coming out of the chair, that cohort was nothing other than
supportive,
totally supportive.
Yeah.
Every now and then, one would take you around the side and just say, you might want to do that differently next time. But did you really mean to say that, Paul? Well, probably not, actually. I could have thought of a better way to say that. But and so that's something else I remember. You know, I didn't feel at any point that I was pushing water up a hill at all. And that is something that we'll be forever grateful for. And those that are still with us, you know, still do that today.
Yes, they do.
And I think that's, and it's sort of a lesson for me too. And that's sort of a bit of what happens now as I come to the end of this GPC chair tenure. It's, you know, I've got two things in my mind. Firstly, get out the way. Get out the way. Everyone's listening.
That's another cardinal rule, isn't it? When you finish your term, step aside.
Exactly. Yes. You know, everyone's listened to me drone on about the theory according to Paul for long enough. So get it. But mind you, the GPC's got one more iteration of it on the 8th of December. But
this is true, and we're all looking forward to that.
But, you know, get out the way, but then be supportive, and that's that'll be our watchword from here, and you know, and see it taken on by, you know, all those that will come behind us. So that's where we're going to be.
Well, this is in fact what you did after your excellent year as master, Paul. There was a short gap, and then suddenly it was conversations and got those up and running, and that is a tremendously valued part of our company's life.
It was really interesting, Michael, because dear old David Bell and Neville Chamberlain got me to go along to the Carlton Club for lunch with a guy called Raphael Vermeer from Conoco.
Yes.
And David and Neville were trying to get Raphael to join. He never did, but he sat there and said, well, why would I join then? Tell me, you know. No. He said, you know, what do you do on a regular basis that could inform me, educate me? And of course, we're sitting there going, yeah, that's a good question, actually. And then so it emerged, this whole idea that, well, we could have a conversation about something, couldn't we? And it sort of started from there. And the first one was Volker Becker's. We got Raphael Vermeer. And I can't remember how many we're up to now. I think we're up to about 24 or something. And for some of it's interesting, Michael, there are some fuelers I only see at conversations. I don't see them anywhere else. And what they tell me is that's why we stay a member.
Yeah.
And so that's why they stay a fueler. And so that's why we have to maintain this potpourri of offering. And it's not binary. It's not, well, you either like coming to the face-to-faces or you don't, or, you know, we have to, this sort of alphabetic spaghetti, that shows me age as well, of offering. And that's what we need to do. and it's literally the case. People pitch up and and that's one of the the sadnesses of this year. We're not going to do that because some of them have logged in on the online ones. They have, but I think for some of them the exchange and the meeting up and the glass of wine and the whatever,
socializing.
Indeed, that's and I think a lot of work gets done there.
Oh, there's no doubt about that, Paul. Yes.
Yeah, and that's fine. I'm very, very happy with that, and and we're eternally grateful to EY for backing that all this time and continuing to back it, and the fact that we find those voluntary donations to the charitable trust, he says, that and that's Peter will know what we're up to on that, but it's it's 5,000 or 6,000 quid over the years, and that it's a lot of money.
It is,
so it's been a real win for us, and it was sort of slightly unexpected, and they're always the best ones, Michael, where suddenly this sort of, it's like a bit of popcorn goes pop, and everyone goes, that's what we should do.
Yes.
And the thing is, and when lots of people come, I mean, the last one, I think we had 57 people there.
Yes.
The physical one. And when lots of people come, it must be a good idea,
Oh, there's no doubt about that. And tell me, Paul, do you intend to continue the relationship with EY, which you have at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
There's no reason why we shouldn't do that. I mean, what I would say is that it needs to stay relevant for them. Otherwise, why would they do it? It's very challenging for them at the moment. The last time I spoke to them, no more than 15% of their staff have gone back to
working in London. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Our major contact, John Clark, when I spoke to him in October, he hadn't been in the office at all, and he finds that it's perfectly doable. So we need to be cognizant as to how EY come out of it, how they plot their path out of it, and we need to be ready to respond and react to that. I'm not saying that that's anything other than we've just got to be ready for it, because it will be different, but that doesn't in any way take away from the fact that those conversations are hugely important to the offering that we make, and when we can get back physical, we'll do them, and that's what we're going to do.
Well, that sounds absolutely tremendous. So the conversations will continue.
Yeah.
The relationship with EY will be nurtured.
Yeah.
And which is absolutely super. And I know I speak for all the company when you say these things, Paul, because we want you to stay engaged with the process. There is no doubt that the establishment and the way that the GPC has been run over the last 3 years has been an absolute education to all of us in terms of your management style and how it gets done. And I think it's been done extremely successfully, Paul, in as much that we get things get done at GPC and then the business goes forward, and 99% of the time it gets approved, and that's really what it's all about at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's interesting, Michael. Shravan asked me for a few words for the next Fueler, and I suggested that my management style was something of a benign dictator. So John will have his own style, and in my few words, I've apologised if anybody thinks I got a bit too snippy on occasions, but it's just the way I am, really. Should we just get this done then? And and that's just that's just me, really. But John will be brilliant at it, and take it through the next stages of the evolution, and that's what it needs. It needs as you say, Michael, it needs nurturing through to the next point. But as I say, it's time for everybody to hear a different voice.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, may I thank you very much for coming along to the interview today. It's been absolutely wonderful. I think that the membership know a little bit more about you than they did an hour ago, and that's absolutely super, and that's the purpose, to educate and entertain and reminisce. That's what this is all about, and it seems to be well received by the membership. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's been a real pleasure just walking through some of the old avenues of memories and thoughts. So my best wishes to everyone, and thank you again.